Hi everyone, welcome back to another episode of Journey to Purpose. With me today I have the wonderful Seonaid Lee, a rogue academic. She's going to talk to us about a whole lot of, of life really, and of not succeeding and how the journeys can turn out. So Seonaid, thank you so much for being here.
It's so nice to be here.
First really question, where in the world are you?
I am in Toronto, Ontario in Canada, and we have a glorious day here today. I had to open my window because it's too hot. So that's a nice change. We had snowsuits on as recently as like 3 weeks ago. So changes really abruptly here.
It same like in the UK. We had a day of sun yesterday. And the news were like, be careful, it's going to be over 26 degrees. And then we got home and it started raining. So you're like, well, that's just England for you. Yeah. But I do like Toronto. It's a wonderful city. I've got family in Toronto. So yes, it's a wonderful part of Canada.
It's a beautiful city. There's so much to do here. I've become I did a brief period in my rogue academics. Last year, I did a period as a Toronto ambassador to get people to go outside and explore their community, their neighborhoods on foot, especially.
That sounds super cool. I feel we can talk about that separately in on another episode of let's go and explore Toronto perhaps. But for today...
Not today. Today we're going to talk about finding your path.
We are.
Or staggering along the path. Or not.
Well, and I think this is a really important topic, and I love the fact that you want to talk about it because that is life. Life isn't linear. Life isn't straightforward. Things don't always go according to plan. No one told us life was going to be this way. If they had, we might have chosen to not engage. Let's be honest.
Yeah. So I just pull the covers over my head and stay in bed with the book.
Yeah. So let's start with. So what has been your where do you see your journey as starting, and when does it first go wrong, perhaps?
Well, I started out in engineering and I wanted to build cars, but I had been raised in this really left-wing hippie academic environment. And it turns out that hippies maybe don't make great engineers. I kept asking the wrong questions. I started out, I was 17 and I went to university, and my first term, I was the one who kept saying, well, what are the implications of this? What are the implications of this? And my classmates, I remember one of my classmates in my first term saying, in 50 years, I'll be dead. I don't care. And I went first off, give yourself more than 50 years, because we were 19.
Right.
But secondly, I was just appalled by that statement. And it was not just him. If that had just been one guy, it would have been easy to dismiss. And sometimes I say things like that and people are like, well, you're picking the words. But I actually did. I did an education degree, and then I did graduate work in education looking at engineering ethics and how engineers talk about and portray the public good. And that is not a left field out there kind of position. That's very, very common, that it's a solve for what's in front of you, solve for the current. You can externalize the costs and leave those for somebody else to fix. And so I did not fit well there because I am a really big picture thinker, very systems oriented. And so I had a real struggle finding a place to fit. And I sort of deployed my technical skills in a bunch of different places. I've done instructional design. I've done systems integration. I built a website for arts organization a long time ago. Big arts, not one of the big professional ones. I taught physics. I taught physics to the Ontario College of Art and Design, which was a really cool gig. It was in the liberal studies program. Yeah, it was in their liberal studies program, and I couldn't count on them to have mathematics. And at the time, I was working on an education degree, and I was doing sociology of education, sociology of knowledge. And so I rewrote my physics curriculum to go, okay, what do we know? Why do we know it? What do we imagine at different scales? What constitutes evidence in this discipline? So I had to be very explicit about what it means to know things in that discipline. But I was also working in instructional design at another university at the time. And so I was working with professors across the university, and they had to grapple with the same questions of what does it mean to know things? What constitutes evidence in this discipline? So I was working with historians and business professors and nursing professors and teaching physics. And so it was a really interesting, dynamic time in my life. And I also had a really long commute and small kids, and I burned out bad. And so then I went off and I was like, okay, let me try something completely different. And I literally went from working at one of the largest universities in the country to raising bees in the middle of nowhere.
And let's explore
I was
that
a
some
terrible
more.
beekeeper, so bad. I was a much better instructional designer.
Do you like bees?
I'm afraid of bees, it turns out. Like, I like bees in principle, but a box with 50,000 bees in it is really scary.
I accept that. It's quite intimidating. When my husband's friend raises bees, and we go there to get the honey from time to time, there are a lot of bees in a beehive.
And they're not aggressive. That's like opening the lid of a box with 50,000 bees in it. It's like, that's a lot of bees.
So clearly, beekeeping wasn't meant to be your purpose.
Beekeeping was not my path, but I'm glad that I did it. So
right.
I said to you when I sent you the proposal for this podcast, and I just read the one that I sent you. I keep notes on my proposals and stuff. And I said, there's a phrase in Jnana, I don't know how to pronounce it, Jnana yoga, which is neti, which is not this. And that's the yoga of sort of insight and precision. And so I think of my life as going through the world and going, I looked under that rock and I looked under that rock. And I found a whole lot of, I keep going back to Thomas Edison. He's like, I haven't failed. I've just found 50,000 ways that don't work.
Yeah. But do you know what? That mindset is so important. I think more so now than ever in the world that we live in. Because it's rapidly changing. If you look at, the industry revolution, the first industrial revolution took us 100 years. And now we're at industry 5.0, and that's 5 years or whatever. Having that I think humility, resilience, just go, well, wasn't meant to be bees.
Oh, it didn't work.
Okay. Yeah. What next? It's really important.
I retrained. I went back and did a new tech program in 2014, so it's 11 years ago now. And then I worked for 3 years, and then I've been writing technical reports for 5 years. And there's been 3 more iterations in the last 10 years. And I'm finding the last couple of reports I've written, I've started to say, I'm not sure I understand what they're doing any longer, because I haven't done hands-on. I'm writing about, I'm getting other people's reports on what they wrote, and then I'm writing that. And so everything is moving so rapidly that I've got kids who are in their 20s, and I'm like, learn how to learn, be really adept, and be willing to wait tables if that's what it's going to take. And they're intellectuals as well. Biomedical science has spent the last couple of years growing yeast for purposes I don't understand. So I think they're studying the mitochondrial paths and the aging processes in yeast cells, and I think that's relevant to questions of aging and health. Mitochondria is a big deal right now. My other older child is a historian. And wants to be a history teacher, and is really enthusiastic about sort of world history and medieval history and non-European medieval history. And so I got these very, very interesting people that I raised that come and tell me stories. And I'm like, oh, I never would have had time to also learn that. So you send other people out into the world to gather stuff for you.
Again, that's a really good lesson, because you can't know everything. And in this changing world, it's really impossible. It's about finding the right people to kind of draw on to help you know the things that you don't have time to learn. Is it your son or your daughter who does history? Sorry, are they boys?
My
girls?
daughter.
So as a side note, my first degree was in history and Russian, and my dissertation was medieval Russian history between the 10th to the 14th century. So I know it's kind of pseudo-European, but there wasn't a lot out there when I did it 20 years ago anyway. It's a great topic. We'll do that for another podcast as well. Medieval Russian history.
You'll just have to tell me that one, because I actually I've been thinking about starting a podcast called Unpublished, which is, here are the books and papers I never got around to writing that I'd really love to put back. I got, not me, but to gather people and say, hey, what was the most interesting thing you never wrote about or never published about or never wrote? Sort of, that's the rogue academic, because I'm going, everybody I know is working so hard. The ones who are not rogue, but like have actual academic careers.
Yeah.
They're teaching, they're doing administration, they're writing a few papers, but they're like, here's all the papers I'm not getting around to writing. Here's the book that I'm not getting around to writing. And so I want to go back and interview. I can start with my friends, but they're like, I'm sure that every academic in the world has 3 or 4 things which they're like, here, I haven't got this to the point that it could pass peer review, but I'd love to tell you about it.
Right.
It's like,
Yeah.
what would you, if you cornered me at a party and my eyes weren't going to glaze over, what story would you tell me?
I mean, in fairness, I'm not sure medieval Russian history wouldn't cause some people to have their eyes glaze over, so I might have to choose that audience wisely.
If I promised my eyes weren't going to glaze over, and I will keep asking you questions. Really? Tell me more about that.
But again, it's a really, I love the idea, so you should do that. Please do that. But I think the reoccurring thing with you is this fun test and adjust, the adaptability of, hey, it doesn't work out, let's try the next thing. But also I think the joy in learning that you bring forward, and that's so important. And I think we sometimes lose that joy when we're stuck in academia, but even stuck in not academia, in professional qualification, company training, and it becomes a chore. But actually, surely it should be a joy.
When it's instrumental, when you're doing it because of something else, where you're like, I need to do this so that I get that, rather than actually going, I'm going to do this for its own merit. And to kind of, when I taught a week-long retreat, and it was called The Journey Itself. And it was about sort of this topic, which is, one of my friends sent me a letter, and it was when we were still writing paper letters, because it was in the late 80s or early 90s. He was very wise for a 17 or 16-year-old. He said, I think it's one of the Beatles, I don't know which one, life is what happens while you're making other plans. I don't know where the quote came from. And that occurred to me in the middle of the night last night, when I was like, I have a podcast tomorrow, I have a cold, my partner has a cold. I had to clean the bedroom because one of us has been in bed sick for the last 5 days.
No.
So I was like, we don't have another place to sit to record this podcast. But I think that engaging with the journey and the moment that I'm in, now I've done a lot of meditation, a lot of mindfulness practice, had to learn a lot about questioning the values of not just Western civilization, but like capitalism in particular, that says you're only as good as your last job. You're only as good as the last thing you did for us. That treats us all as if we're for something. It treats everything as if it's for something, and to kind of embrace the now and the isness and go, what if this were the moment, if this were it, and there wasn't something else I was working towards? How can I have joy and pleasure and engagement right here? And sometimes it's easier than others. And so sometimes it is that discernment. I was talking to one of my colleagues who's also a friend, and we have a regular meeting about, like, what do we do with all this academic knowledge that we've got when we want to be practical participants in the world? And I use the word discernment a lot in that conversation. And he said that, to me, that's what your key core thing is that you're bringing, because I've done all this. I did this like intellectual heady stuff, and then I did a whole lot of embodiment work. I took an embodiment coaching program. I've done yoga. I've done meditation. I've done ecstatic dance. I've done breath work. I've done all kinds of things. And when I write down, like, my core project is called Bodies of Knowledge, and it's about how we learn things and they become incorporated, part of our bodies, and then we respond and react from those. And the discernment says, how do we become intentional and go, that thing that I intellectually acknowledge and believe to be true, how do I bring that down into my body so that I respond and react in the world as though I believed it were true? And so when I think we're not for something, the world is not for something, everything has inherent value and worth. If I think that, how do I not treat myself as though I actually am for something? I have some other extrinsic purpose, and I haven't validated it if I haven't succeeded at it. And so that's my big body of knowledge, which is like it's if I stacked up all the pieces of paper I've written about it, it's probably about this thick. It's like Chidi Anaganye's big giant 3,600 page unreadable work. So I have to keep teasing it apart into smaller pieces so that it makes more sense.
I,
And it's more
first,
accessible.
yeah, I mean, so firstly, I love the reference to The Good Place. If anyone listening hasn't watched it, they need to go and watch The Good Place. It's a brilliant TV series. Secondly, I think I love where you're going because I've always loved learning, and similar to you, I will find new things. But the question I always have for myself is what is this learning for? And sometimes it's for the joy of it, and that's perfectly okay. Sometimes it's to progress myself professionally, personally, whatever it is. But then you are left with this big stack of information, of data, I guess, that you don't use. And so I'm always like, can I take one or two things? If I'm going to a conference, if I'm going on a course, what are the one or two things I can take and use and integrate into my life? But it's not easy because there's the new shiny thing, there's the noise of the world around you telling you how you should and shouldn't think and shouldn't behave. And what I love about what you're talking about really is accepting that perhaps not everything has to have a purpose, or perhaps the purpose doesn't need to be obvious to you at this point in time. Just know that in the biggest scheme of things, it will be revealed or not revealed at the appropriate moment, but that's also okay.
Yeah. Yeah. I think of it as like a giant Lego box of ideas and concepts, and like that I find myself rummaging around through. I've got snippets of poetry that come back to me, and I learned them in high school, and they kind of just keep percolating back to the top, and I think about them over and over again. And papers that I read in university 25 years ago that I didn't get it, but I didn't throw it away. I kind of put it somewhere over there. And I was saying to my husband yesterday, I wish I could see my brain working, because I can feel it sometimes like flip. I could feel it almost like going through, I think they call that the default mode, when your brain's kind of reorienting and recompacting things and drawing new connections. It must be firing synapses. I don't know if they're firing randomly. I don't know anything about neurology. There's a big gap, and I'm not even going to try. Because I'm more interested in the subjective experience rather than that kind of objective. I'm quite happy to know that other people are studying the neural correlates, and, but it feels like my brain's rifling through and pulling things out and putting them together with other things. And I'm not actively doing it. If I just sit back and I let it happen. I was sitting and staring off into space a couple of weeks ago, and I looked at him and I said, here's the worst thing. This is what it looks like when I'm actually working. If I'm sitting with my hands on the keyboard, I'm reporting. But this thing right here, where I'm letting my brain do this, like what happens if I put these pieces together like this? That's the real work. And allowing myself the privilege of sitting and staring off into space for 45 minutes to think. Like, I actually was in a PhD program in physics in 1997. And when I quit, said, I don't have time to think. And that was the piece. Now, so, like 28 years later. Yeah.
Who's counting?
Oh, no. I can go, that was the piece that was missing, that right to kind of stare off into space and let the things reorder themselves. Because when you're working on a PhD, you're pouring in information so fast. And there's this like, why is all of our education a hazing ritual? Why do we think it has to be done so quickly? Why do we have to hit the ground running? Because there are things like, I also said to my partner yesterday, do you think that we're just both divorced? And I said, do you think we're just better suited to one another, or are we just older now? And
I mean,
I said, there's no way to
can
tell.
be true. Both.
If we were these people 30 years ago, maybe we'd be with our original partners still, because we're, better people.
I mean, I've got to unpick some of what you just said, because it's brilliant. I think if you went to a company,
I'm getting a Kleenex. I'll be right back.
Oh,
you talk.
That's all right, go ahead. If you went to a company and said to them, okay, here's my plan for the week, and on Tuesday afternoon I'm going to stare at a wall for 45 minutes, they'd go, you're absolutely mad. Like, that's not productive. But your point is so, so valid and necessary because, having worked in lots of corporate environments, like you don't get thinking time, you get reaction time or responding time. And something I used to always say to my team was like, you need to have that thinking time, knowing full well that my thinking time used to come like at 10 o'clock at night. But what I'm also finding now, exactly, is that because of technology, how am I switching off? Because we have that really terrible habit of picking up our phones or turning on the TV. And I don't watch a lot of TV actually, but I'm on my phone way more than I should be, and I know I am. And I say I'm not that bad, but I am just about everybody else because most of us are. And so you're again not allowing your brain that time to reorg, reset, process, and it's meant to also happen at nighttime. That's when all your the happenings of the day get put together. But if you're like from 6 a.m. to 10 p.m. or whatever the timescale is, constantly receiving or sending data, then yes, at nighttime you may process stuff, but is it enough? And the answer is probably not. So getting that disciplined to do what you're doing and going, I'm going to stare at a wall for 45 minutes and just see what comes out. And that's gold.
And it doesn't have to be sitting. Like you can go for a walk. You can go to the gym and run on the treadmill and don't take a podcast with you.
Yeah.
Making space for that is incredibly challenging because it looks like you're not doing anything. The question that I started with today was about what happens when you're not making any progress. And so when I've had, like, I really wanted an upwardly mobile career where you go like check boxes and here are the marker points where you go, oh yes, I succeeded. Ding, ding. I got a promotion. I got a raise. I know I'm doing it right. Like that's the good student mentality, right? And I've grappled a lot with the idea of callings and purpose because as an engineer and a scientist and an intellectual of the side of the academy, the idea that we could have purpose, that callings might be something real, that they are a representation of our reason to be here is uncomfortable. And also, we do, I think, have a superstition that if I'm on the right path, I will be rewarded. I will get signs. And I do kind of feel like I do get signs. I bump into people who have the next piece of information that I need. I meet people who definitely are contributing to my thought processes. But what we really mean is, I think I will achieve material success and fame and acclaim and all the exterior manifestations of having done the work, having done the right thing. And I still, I've been working on this project. This Bodies of Knowledge project has been percolating in various forms for 30 years. And I've had very little success with it. I taught yoga briefly, and I was teaching like one class a week or something, maybe two. I've done a whole lot of things I've failed at. I've done fairly well doing them and then not turned them into a career a whole bunch of times. And so if you looked from outside, you would go, oh, well, she keeps failing at everything. But I do the thing and I'm like, oh, I learned what I needed to learn from that. And I'm still working on this bigger problem, the bigger question. What is the world we want to live in? How is that playing out in our bodies? How are our reactions being used against us? And so I'm working on this really big philosophical question that I might not finish, but I better put something out in the world. Or I'm going to die with this. It's just going to go to the grave with me. It would be very sad. But
Here's a different,
it feels like a purpose still. What?
Yeah. Because my question for you is going to be two questions is, have you been happy with the things that you've done? And do you have any regrets about the choices you've made?
I said to my best friend a couple of days ago, people asked, like, what would you change about your life? And I said, well, I've probably made mistakes, but I don't know which ones they were. Like, you can't go back and change one thing without unpicking and unraveling the entire thing. And so, I am happy. I wish that I had more impact. I think that the things that I know, I'm very frustrated with. I've said a bunch of times, like, I feel like I'm in a glass, if you keep rats or something in a glass
Glass cage bowl. Yeah.
Yeah, if they're in a fish an aquarium. And
Yeah.
they're doing this at the walls. Sometimes it does feel like I'm doing this at the walls. I'm like, oh, I see people having really interesting conversations on the internet. And I'm like, oh, I know something about that. I could help.
Waving through that window, trying to get someone's attention.
But I've had an enormous amount of time to think, which I wouldn't have had if had been executing on being successful at the things I was trying to do. If I had built a yoga studio, that would have absorbed all of my time, and I wouldn't have had time to think about the way that yoga incorporates into other physical practices. I wouldn't have had time to think about, like, I've taken a lot of classes in complexity science and then reading a lot about economics. And so now I'm doing a whole lot of study about sort of degrowth, post-growth, complexity economics, behavioral economics, and sort of the foundations of the economic and monetary system. And I wouldn't have had time to do that if I had been building cars all these years, or if I had been teaching physics all these years, because my ex-husband's a physics professor, and I lived with him for 20 years while he was physics professoring, and I was like, that does not look like very much fun. And that was the job I was supposed to be having. Like, that's the PhD that I quit. And I was like, yeah, that really looks like it's occupying all of your time and brain and energy. And so I wanted to be successful, but I wanted to be me more, I think.
I mean, it's really, again, language is so important. What is success? What does it look like? Because it's different things to different people. And I think, so realistically for me, definition of success is there's a financial element, which is I can afford to do stuff and to, Maslow's hierarchy of needs, check. I've got the basic line covered off. Well done, me. But am I being mentally challenged? Am I doing good in the world? I mean, I'm not, probably like you, I don't consider myself to be someone who is infamous or famous, which is both good and bad, depending on what you do, but I'm okay with that. But I do know that I have impact with people I work with, and that makes me feel good. And that, to me, is a sign of success. I think where society struggles, and particularly Western society, is that success definition is often very, very financial based or status based. And actually, we know those things on their own don't give us the joy that we need, or for most of us, they don't. So,
and they're only available to a small. They're only available to a small number of people. Like, if the goal is status, there's a losing and winning. There's a hierarchy. Whereas if the goal is deeply enjoying and sinking into the pleasures of your life, genuinely connecting with other human beings, like just sitting down and drinking your coffee in the morning and paying attention to it instead of walking down the street while sipping it and listening to a podcast and avoiding getting hit by cars, those are different experiences. And one of them, like, I think you get more out of the coffee if you pay attention to it. And paying attention to things is available in a way that status is not.
Absolutely. And again, so I'm going through my midlife crisis currently. I'm in my 40s, so it's about time. And it's probably quite a benign midlife crisis, because all I want to do is what I'm doing now, but like better balance. But one of the reflections I had recently was the thing I missed the most is community. And I served in the army, and there was always like a pre-made community for you to rock up and join. And that was amazing. And even in some of my corporate life, my first corporate job was with a company called Lockheed Martin, and that particular office where I worked was a great community, and they're the people sort of that I'm probably still the closest to. As I've progressed, and again, going back to status and finances, so I've had pay rises, I've had promotions, but it gets lonelier higher you go, I find, because suddenly you're expected to have all the answers. You're expected to kind of be like perfect, even though none of us are. And you start to get to this position where either people don't want the responsibility of the leadership, or they can't do it. And so if you're someone who fills that gap, then your peer group decreases. So my current midlife crisis is finding different communities that I can be part of. And what I've also realized is like you, I've I'm broad in my interests from science through to arts. And so I kind of need a group like for my language interests. I need a group for my sports interests. I need a group for my music interests. And it's understanding that it's okay to have these different groups because I am not a homogenous being. We are all multifaceted. And the second part is that I like working from home because of the flexibility it gives me, but I also need people. And so now I'm trying to find that balance between things I can do at home and I like the quiet time, I like the thinking time, versus going out into the world of living. And I think the reason that I bring this up is your point about the coffee drinking is taking the time to do it. That's not necessarily that could be a community activity, but it's just taking the time to be present around people. Doesn't mean you have to be totally on and off. Like you don't have to be on send mode and like telling them things or on receive mode and listen to things. You can just be there, and that is a massive difference.
Yeah. And it's funny. I was on somebody else's podcast and she said, "You're the first person who's ever sent me a pitch that you have nothing to sell." And I'm like, I just like talking to people.
Me too.
I've got so many ideas and I don't want to take them with me. I think that they're useful. As much as I started off by saying things aren't for things, I think that I've been much happier as I've learned to incorporate this stuff. I've been much happier as I learned that there's no reason to believe that all of the threads of my life are going to be coherent. There's no reason to believe that everything I've ever learned is going to fit together into a nice box, because that's not how the world works. And, we pick up things and we're like, oh, here's this piece of 10th century Russian history. How does it connect with this piece of general relativity?
Totally does. Don't worry. We'll cover that off in the next episode.
But you've got to do a lot of thread between them.
Yeah. Well, they joined the Hanseatic League, which was no, we won't go there. And it's a really good point. Everything is kind of, that 7 steps of separation. I think it's less than that now because of the way the world has changed with technology. And so I think that's the wonderful part of the world we live in now. Like I said I was on the call with my mentor one of my mentoring coaches this morning, and he was like, "What do you want from your life?" I was like, "Whoa, like I'm only in my 40s. I've got like another 60 years to go. Hang on there." But what I did say was, I would like to spend less time on my computer because so much of my work and everything is on the computer, and there are days where I feel like I don't need legs. There's also the advantages of the computer. Like you and I couldn't do this interview the way we do now without this.
We would never have met. We wouldn't be joining these ideas.
Yeah. And so it is about finding that balance which works for you and those threads that connect us in really weird ways, which is wonderful.
And everybody has their own, like each of us is that unique combination. Like I always picture of us as like I talked about, you couldn't unpull one of the threads without unraveling the whole tapestry. And I think each of us is that kind of tapestry where we're carrying all these threads from all of our histories, our family's history, our identities, everything that sort of like I always think of us as being sort of shot through by these threads of history. And then when I do the embodiment practices, I'm like, which of these threads is pulling on me right now? And is it distorting the whole thing? And so one of my goals, and I guess actually the very first sutra in the yoga, the Patanjali Sutras, is about yoga. Now is the time for yoga. And it goes, yoga is the stilling of the mind waves. And so when I think about the ways in which these things pull at us, it's just to go, okay, I can reduce the tension there. I can reduce how strongly that thread of my history is pulling on me. And then we've got that capacity to do the discernment to go, which of these do I want to be emphasizing at this time? Which of these is the best offer and contribution in this situation right this minute? And it's not always going to be the same thing, so that you don't go, oh, well, I have a hammer, everything's a nail, but you go, oh, I've got this whole toolbox. What's the relevant tool at this point? And so a lot of the time, the relevant tool is to just sit and listen.
How would you recommend people go about not finding their purpose? It's like
not finding their purpose. I found meditation very beneficial, and I think that try something, I think is what I would say, is try something. Go out and go to the park, go for a walk, try a meditation, watch a YouTube video, do some journaling, like try something. Actually, Pema Chodron said, if what you're doing isn't working, do something different. And so it's not necessarily that there's a prescription. I found when I started, and there's this like that steep learning curve at the beginning of things. There's often a lot of really dramatic benefits when you start a new practice, and then you stop getting those dramatic benefits because you've sort of incorporated it. So I went and did a float, and the floats, you go to a
In a
sensory
pod
deprivation
thing.
tank.
Yeah, I did that
A
once.
sensory
Oh,
deprivation
awesome.
tank. And
Yeah.
I can float in the dark for an entire hour and
Me too.
nothing happens because I've got like 2,000 hours or whatever of meditation practice behind me. So when I go and I lie in the dark for an hour, and I hear other people go like, they had psychedelic experiences, they had anxiety attacks. I go and I'm lying in the dark. I'm like, this is nice.
I'm
And it's
making
not
shapes in the
dramatic.
salt water. I'm like, how many different ways can I float in the salt water while I'm here? You know, that's what I was doing.
Yeah, but I found when I started ecstatic dance that the first 6 or 8 times that I went and did an ecstatic dance, every single one of those was like, it felt like I'd just done 6 months of yoga practice in terms of
Wow.
it shifting things around and moving things, and sort of it shakes up the whole body. And then after I did that for a while, didn't feel that any longer. It's like, yeah, this is really beautiful. I love doing the ecstatic dance, but I'm not having those intense experiences with it any longer. And, you know, not getting addicted to the intense experiences is also a huge part of it. I think we're very dopamine driven these days, and you can get on that hedonic treadmill, and you can do that with spiritual bypassing. You can go and be looking for those intense experiences and to kind of go, okay, but once you've had it and you have integrated that, the calm is the point at the end. And so you got to not be chasing the next high. So it is start something, recognizing that if you have a super intense experience, that doesn't mean that's the right thing. This is the thing. Like, don't then say, this is what I'm going to do for the rest of my life. And don't think that if you're not having the intense experiences any longer, that it's because it's not working. It's because it already worked. So
it's a
those
lovely
rejections
reframe.
in the intensity is like when you're feeling pretty calm all the time, actually, that's great. That's great. And I get as much now I started learning Mandarin this week, and I'm watching toddler Mandarin videos. Ni hao.
Lucha.
And I'm watching it for toddlers, though. Xie xie.
It's my three words.
I was watching yesterday, and it was like, oh, that's a tree. Oh, I know that word. Oh, she put a hat on. I know the word hat. And so there's just this like handful of words. And I went, wow, that felt as exciting as like lots of other things. And so maybe being able to reconnect with that joyful exuberance, that's all on offer still there somewhere. So you can get huge amounts of joy out of tiny, tiny things. Caterpillars, frogs.
Butterflies. They're awesome. I love that. So I think there's 2 things I'd say to what you've said. One is I think it might be a Chinese proverb. They always come up with the good ones. But it's all things are difficult before they are easy. And if you're going to make any change to your life, your habits, you're often going to meet that resistance at some points. And it's staying the course to go through that resistance, to go to the other side, and then maybe go, okay, I've gone through it now. It's still not for me, but at least I proved it, and that's okay.
Although I said I was a terrible beekeeper, I was much, much happier being a terrible beekeeper than I was at the job I really loved, but where the whole lifestyle around it was extremely stressful because it was commuting and it was living in the city, and we weren't earning enough money, and my husband was in grad school. And so like I went from being severely burned out to doing something that like I was just bad at. And I remember one day in April, I was trying to keep my greenhouse from blowing away in a snowstorm, and I failed. And I was standing in a snowstorm holding onto this giant sheet of plastic, and I thought, at least I'm not driving a car to my office. And I was like, okay, I guess that's a sign I've made the right choice to this point.
Everything is relative.
And then knowing that that solution wasn't permanent, because I have moved back to the city, because I also had other things I needed to do. And I was looking for community, and I was looking for more intellectual stimulation, and I was looking to reconnect with the people who were doing this work on societal transformation and big economic questions. And they weren't there in critical mass where I lived at the very, very edge of rural Canada. So I moved back. And so kind of also going, one of the things I want to make a video about for my YouTube channel is see people go like, if you're not happy there, you won't be happy anywhere. And that's not been my experience. You can have that discernment again to go, is this situational or is it me? And when you've done all the work where you're like, yeah, I'm pretty sure this is situational, and I do have a pull, I do have a call, I do have a desire to move my journey to the next stage. When I have genuinely committed and adapted and moved to the next stage, I think every time I've been happier. Until that period of my life, also, I had concluded it, but I've held on. I think I've held on longer when I had learned what I was there to learn. Because of circumstances, because I had children, because I was married, because I committed to things. But I think that we have that discernment to sort of feel our way through and go, is this a me problem or is this a thing problem? And I feel like there's this pull that goes, not just the resistance, not just the rejection of where you are, but like being able to sort of hear an echo of what's possible, an echo of the future, where you're like, there's something over there. There's something over there. And listening to those things and being quiet enough in yourself to say, I think I need to go that way. I don't know why. And I don't believe in the burning the boats thing usually.
Very wise.
Just go for a walk over there. Say hi to someone. Introduce yourself. Maybe don't burn the boats just yet. Don't quit your job.
I love that. How can people find you if they want to continue the conversation or just watch your YouTube channel or anything like that?
Yeah, mine, we're going to put my name in the show notes, right?
Yeah.
Okay, because my name's hard to spell. I have been very active on LinkedIn. I haven't been making YouTube videos recently, but I do use my YouTube channel to communicate to people. I have a website as well. But again, there's a lot of back content on my website, but where I'm most active is on LinkedIn. Where I'm actually making new content, and there's some really phenomenal networks of people on LinkedIn that I hear LinkedIn gets slagged a lot, and I've met a lot of wonderful, interesting people on LinkedIn. So if you can get past the thrilled to announce kind of posts, there's some real, genuine grappling with the situations we find ourselves in. And I'm really working on polycrisis, metacrisis. How do we find our way in this very rapidly changing world? And I work with a lot of people on LinkedIn who do that too.
Brilliant. I think LinkedIn is underrated personally, so I'm with you. It's a good place to be. So go hang out there. So no, thank you ever so much. I feel we could talk about loads of things and go on a lot longer, but it has been wonderful today. I appreciate your honesty and your humor, and I look forward to seeing more from you.
Thank you for helping me stay on track to answer the questions about the journey and the path and the purpose, because it's very easy for me to pull in all of I've got all of the pieces. I left most of my toolbox over here. So,
as I said, in this conversation, the destination isn't important. It's just a random journey. We'll see what happens.
And it's enjoying. Just enjoy the journey. Go for a wander. Don't go somewhere. Just go for a wander.
Go off the path and see what happens.
Yeah.
Brilliant. Seonaid, thank you so much, and see you again soon.
So lovely to chat with you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.